Kathy with a K.
And I'm Kathy with a C.
And this is Killer Destinations.
Between July 1984 and April of 1985, over a dozen people went missing from Northern California. Nobody made the connection that these cases were related until one very observant off-duty police officer witnessed a petty crime and decided to take action.
Located in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains, Wilseyville is a relative newcomer to Calaveras County. It was established in 1941 as an unincorporated community and is in a rustic and wooded area east of Sacramento called Sandy Gulch. The town was named for Lawrence Wilsey, who was a manager at the local mill. Wilseyville consisted of company-owned homes and a store, as well as the mill buildings. Today, Wilseyville is just under 8 square miles with a population of fewer than 450 residents. But this small community, with its wooded and rustic beauty, was launched into the spotlight in 1985 when people with nefarious intentions used the privacy of Wilseyville as a place to go off the grid.
On June 2, 1985, John Callis was shopping at a lumber and hardware store in South San Francisco. And John Callis happened to be a very seasoned reserve officer for the San Francisco Police Department. In fact, he'd worked there 28 years. While he was shopping, John saw an Asian man that he thought was acting suspiciously, so he kept his eye on him. And then he sees this guy go up and pick up a large vise. He walks right past John and right out the store. So, of course, John, with his cop mentality, didn't want this guy to get away with shoplifting. So he goes up to the sales clerk and he asks, "Hey, did that gentleman just pay for that?" And she says no. So he goes out into the parking lot and he sees the Asian man standing by the passenger door of a gold Honda. Then he sees him just walk away. So John goes up to the car and there's no one in the car. And all he sees is a box of wrenches in the back seat, but he doesn't see the vise. But the trunk is slightly open, so John opens the trunk, he sees the stolen vise, and he calls the police. So as John's on the phone with the police department, another man walks up. Now this guy's white, he's a little older, he has a beard, and he says, hey, I'm going to go pay for this vise. So John says, "Look, I don't work here. Go talk to the store clerk." So he sees the bearded man walk into the store. In the meantime, South San Francisco police show up and they run the license plate of this gold Honda, and it comes back registered to a man named Lonnie Bond. The officer on site also opens the trunk lid, and he sees the stolen vise, and he sees a backpack, and he opens the backpack. In the backpack, he sees a gun and a silencer. Now, the silencer is illegal. You can't have a silencer. So he runs the serial number on the gun, and he finds the gun is registered to a man named Scott Stapley. And he's like, "This is weird." So the bearded man now comes out of the store and he's like, "Oh, hey, officer, no harm, no foul. I just paid for the vise that my friend had taken." And so the officer goes, "Sir, I need to see some ID." So he pulls out identification and the ID says Scott Stapley. So the officer says, "Whose car is this?" And he goes, "Oh, it's my friend Lonnie Bond's. He's not here. He's up north. He's letting me use his car." Now, the cop is looking at the driver's license, and he's noticing that the man who handed him this license does not look like Scott Stapley. Scott Stapley is much younger. So while the gentleman is standing there, the officer runs the VIN on the Honda Accord, and he finds out that it belongs to a missing person named Paul Costner. So we have a license plate belonging to Lonnie Bond, a driver's license, and a gun belonging to Scott Stapley, and a vehicle belonging to a missing person. So this cop is like, "I don't know what the hell is going on, but you're under arrest for this silencer." So this gentleman is taken to the police station, and the officer turns the vehicle over to Inspector Irene Brune. Irene Brune worked for the Missing Persons Unit, and she'd been investigating Paul Costner's disappearance. So Kath, what happened is 7 months before the shoplifting incident, Paul Costner made plans with his girlfriend to watch a movie on TV when he got home from work that night, But he's like, honey, I'm going to go sell my car. I'll be back in a bit. He never returns. He was supposed to have breakfast with his sister the next day. I believe his sister's name was Sharon, and he never showed up at her house. So Sharon finds out from Paul's girlfriend that he didn't come home that evening. And so she's very nervous because he's an extremely reliable person. So Sharon reports her brother missing. And I saw this documentary, and it was from a British production company called Crime Up Close, and Sharon was interviewed. And what she said was that when she called the police department to report her brother missing, they're like, yeah, we don't search for missing persons over the age of 6.
That doesn't make sense to me.
It doesn't make sense to me either, but this is what she said in the interview. However, we will look for a stolen vehicle. And so in this interview, she's like, how ridiculous. They don't want to look for a human being, but they'll look for a car. So what she does is she puts ads in the paper, she posts this picture, she does everything she can to try to find her brother. And every single month, she calls the police station and reports his vehicle stolen so that it stayed on the hot sheets. And she did this every month for 7 months. So now they find his vehicle, but they don't find Paul. At the police station, the white bearded man eventually identifies himself as 39-year-old Leonard Lake, and he told the police that his friend who tried to steal the Vice was 24-year-old Charles Ng. The police were like, well, wait a second, why are you using a fake ID? What's going on here? Blah, 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 blah. But he's not really speaking. He gave them no substantive information or explanation as to why he had the car and the ID and the gun and all this kind of stuff. But they give him a notepad so that Leonard could write down the information about Charles Ng. So after jotting down some notes, he asked for a glass of water and an aspirin. Leonard Lake swallowed the pill and started convulsing, and he was immediately rushed to the hospital unconscious. As he is clinging to life in the ICU, the police call his mom and his sister, so they immediately rush to the hospital where detectives are ready to ask them questions about this guy. They inform the police that Leonard always had cyanide tablets hidden in his clothing, just in case he ever needed to use them. The note that he had written on the pad before convulsing was not any information about Charles Ng. What he did was write a quick letter to his ex-wife, Clara Lynn, and it said, "Dear Lynn, I love you. I forgive you. Freedom is better than all else. Tell Fern I'm sorry, Mom, Patty, and all. I'm sorry for all the trouble."
While police were interviewing Leonard Lake in the station, Inspector Brune received Paul Costner's car, and remember, this is the missing person, and the inspector thoroughly searched it. Inside the vehicle, she found a utility bill that was addressed to Leonard Lake's ex-wife, Clara Lynn, the recipient of the note, and the envelope listed an address in Wilseyville, a small town in Calaveras County, which was about 150 miles east of where the attempted shoplifting had occurred. So the inspector called Clara Lynn, who agreed to meet with her. Kath, it was the day after Leonard Lake poisoned himself, and while he was clinging to life, that Inspector Brune sat down with Clara Lynn, hoping that Clara Lynn could help them find this mysterious Charles Ng, the Asian man who had left the scene of the shoplifting. Clara Lynn told the inspector she did not know where Charles was, but she agreed to take Inspector Brune to the Wilseyville address on the utility bill. That property, Kath, it turned out, was owned by her parents, and she and Leonard lived there while they were married. But after the divorce, Leonard continued to use the cabin. And at this point, Clara Lynn was living in South San Francisco. The Wilseyville cabin was on a wooded 2-acre property. So Clara Lynn gives Inspector Brune a key and allowed her to search the cabin. Inside the living room, Inspector Brune discovered 2 pieces of expensive video equipment, including a VCR that appeared related to another missing persons case she was working on. And actually, it was several missing persons, Kath. It was the Dubs family. And what had happened is in July of 1984, so 9 months before Leonard Lake was arrested, Harvey Dubs, his wife Deborah, and their 16-month-old Sean went missing. They'd lived in an apartment in San Francisco and Harvey was starting a new videotaping business, so he placed an ad in the paper to sell some of his video equipment. The buyer was supposed to meet Harvey to buy the equipment at the Dubbs home, but it was the last time the family was seen. So, when Inspector Brune saw the video equipment at the Wilseyville property, she called her office and found out that the serial number for the VCR belonged to Harvey Dubbs, the father of this missing family. Now, Leonard Lake has been connected to another missing persons case. So at this point, Kathy, Clara Lynn is like, you know what? I think I changed my mind. You are not allowed to search the house or the property ever again.
I do take-backs.
Exactly. So the law enforcement said, you may do take-backs, but we do takes. And we're going to get permission from a search warrant. And by the way, we're locking down this property until we can get back in here. And that's exactly what happened. But now, because of Clara Lynn's, no.
Yeah, don't look here.
I know.
Don't look there.
Don't dig in that place.
Don't look in that closet.
Right. And the freezer's broken. You don't need to get there. The officers who went to the house to search left no stone unturned. Once they were in the house, Kathy, they found a nightmare. It was bullet holes, blood stains, more video equipment, and bondage paraphernalia. And there was also a shed on the property, which was built up against a hill. In the shed, detectives found a hidden door in the wall. So they're really not messing around with this whole no stone unturned thing.
No. And the shed looked very...
Sheddy?
Well, exactly what you'd expect. It was sheddy. It had tools, it had shelves, it had various things.
And honestly, I mean, I know detectives are obviously really good at this, or all police officers at the searching, but the fact that they were able to go behind shelves and find a hidden door,
right,
really does say that they were going to rip this place apart.
Oh, totally.
When they went through this hidden door, there were 2 other rooms that had now been built into the side of the hill. So this is all under the dirt. It was not visible from the outside. And according to court records, the first room they walked into contained a bed, a desk, dressers, and some food. Now, beyond that, there was a second room separated by a wooden door. But this room was smaller. It was about 7 feet by 3 feet and contained a small bed with a foam pad on it, a plastic bucket, and a roll of toilet paper. Now, Kath, the door to the smaller room could only be opened from the outside. The door had a peephole, and sitting outside the door was a pair of night vision goggles. So whoever was in there was in total sensory isolation. But obviously somebody could look into this peephole using the night vision goggles to see what they were doing. According to the Crime Up Close documentary that Kathy referred to, the first room also contained 21 photographs of different women. All were nude or semi-nude. There was also a book called The Collector by John Fowles.
And Kath, this book, which I haven't read, but I'm definitely going to, is about a man who has a regular average job, but he's obsessed with a woman named Miranda. So he kidnaps her and holds her hostage, attempting to make her fall in love with him. And apparently the book is a very good book, and I believe it was this author's first shot at a novel.
Was it a B on a TS?
It was not a B on a TS, thank God. But apparently the book is written from the perspective of the man and the perspective of the woman who's being held captive. But anyway, the girl in captivity in the book is named Miranda.
But keeping with their mantra of leaving no stone unturned, the officers began digging outside the shed. And that's when detectives hit pay dirt. They found a journal belonging to Leonard Lake, as well as a videotape. In the tape, Leonard is talking to the camera and explaining his goals. He talks about wanting an off-the-shelf girlfriend, and following along with the collector idea, he's determined to hold a woman hostage and turn her into his sex slave. He would deprive her of sound and light, punish her if she broke his rules, and would give small rewards when she was good, like magazines or music. Detectives were horrified by the depravity of the callousness of his confessions because he talked so callously about inflicting such mental and physical damage on a young woman.
And Kath, you can go on YouTube and you could see pieces, not whole things, of these videos, and it is so unbelievably disturbing.
No, thank you.
This guy...
And thank you for taking one for the team.
Yeah, no, I didn't watch everyone that was available, but he was so obsessed and mentally perverted, obsessed with the idea of having a woman that he could hold captive. And he was very specific. He described the body type. I like slender women with small breasts. He was so specific in this fantasy. And he said, I believe I could get compliance in a very short amount of time. And he talked about the rules he would have. One of them was you can't cross your arms, you can't cross your legs, and you can't put your lips together. So any kind of body language that would express dissatisfaction would warrant severe punishment. And so he believed, like you said, severe punishments, little rewards. He could have somebody totally compliant as long as he's putting them in a sensory deprived chamber.
Detectives also found a handwritten journal detailing Leonard Lake's long-held bunker fantasies. He had written about having a sex slave for over 20 years before all of this started.
Detectives also found a second tape. On it was written M, the letter M ladies, Kathy/Brenda. So detectives watched this tape as Leonard Lake is sexually abusing and psychologically torturing two different women. Now, they were not on video together, and it appeared that they were on the property at separate times, but Leonard was the primary culprit. However, Charles Ng was also seen on the video mentally and physically torturing and subjugating and laughing at each of the women. And Kath, it was so sad. One of the women kept begging for her baby. Where's my baby? I want my baby. And they were laughing.
Oh, that's so awful.
I know. And they were using the baby as leverage against her. It just gross. So the first scene in the video shows a woman shackled to a chair, and the two men, Lake and Ng, tells her, if you cooperate, you're going to be free within a month. In about 30 days, we'll drug you, we'll blindfold you, and then we'll just release you somewhere and you could find your way out. If you don't cooperate, we're going to shoot you and we're going to bury you in the same place we buried your boyfriend. They also asked this woman to give them her boyfriend's bank account information.
Do you know, did she have that information?
I don't know. And most of the information here is from court records. There was actually a court opinion that was over 160 pages. Unbelievable. So both of these women on the video were told they were going to cook, they were going to clean, and they were going to have sex when the men wanted. They were both forced to strip, and like one of them had her clothing just cut off her, and photos were taken of both of them. And these poor women were just abused and terrified. Now, there was no murder recorded on the tape, thank God, but detectives now know this insignificant shoplifting incident led them to this house of horrors. Detectives are completely freaked out, but they know, oh my God.
It's just the tip of the iceberg.
Just like, this is crazy. So they dig up a 50-yard long trench in this backyard, and they just kept finding bits of information connected to people that were missing. And they found driver's licenses belonging to Kathleen Allen and Brenda O'Connor, both of whom were missing. These were the two women on the M ladies tape. Now, Kathleen's boyfriend was missing and Brenda's fiance was missing as well. And Brenda was the one who was on tape begging for her baby, who was also nowhere to be found. So by this point, Leonard Lake had died. He clung to life for a few days before the cyanide killed him, and Charles Ng was nowhere to be found. And ex-wife Clara Lynn refused to cooperate with the police.
So now we're going to tell you what we found out about the two women in the video. Brenda was engaged to Lonnie Bond, and the two had a baby together, Lonnie Jr. Now remember, when police ran the license plate of the gold Honda that was involved in the Vice shoplifting, it came back registered to a man named Lonnie Bond. So this was Brenda's fiance, and still missing. Now, Kathy, here's what's interesting is that just a few months before Leonard Lake swallowed that cyanide tablet, Lonnie Bond rented the cabin next door to Leonard Lake's Wilseyville property. The two cabins actually shared a common driveway, and Leonard complained to Lonnie's property manager that somebody was firing gunshots from the house and that Lonnie kept failing to lock the gate to their common driveway. And it was just shortly after that, Kathy, that Brenda, Lonnie, and their baby were never seen again. Now, a friend of Brenda's who visited their property regularly was a man named Scott Stapley. This is the man whose ID was being used by Leonard Lake, and it was his gun that was in the trunk when Lake was arrested. Scott Stapley was also missing, and a shirt bearing his name was dug up in the Wilseyville backyard. So regarding Kathleen, 2 months before Leonard Lake was arrested, so now this is April of 1985, Kathleen was at work at a Safeway when she got a phone call. A man was on the other line and he said, Michael's been shot. I'm going to pick you up tonight and we're going to go to Lake Tahoe. And Michael was Kathleen's boyfriend. So later that evening, Kathleen called a friend of hers and she said, okay, I got to tell you what's going on. I just got a call from a man who's going to pick me up and take me to Lake Tahoe. What happened was 2 days ago, I got a phone call from Michael, as we said, her boyfriend, and he had said that he was in Lake Tahoe, he'd gotten into some trouble, and so he was going to send someone to pick her up in a couple of days and take her to him. So Kathleen knew that that's what this call was about, but she tells her friend that this is happening, and just a couple of hours after that, she is seen on video at the Safeway getting into a gold Honda. She called this same friend a little bit later that night, and she said she was in a hotel room, but she couldn't talk right now, and she was whispering as she's saying this. She said that there was a guy in there with her, and he was really weird, and he wanted to take pictures of her. And so she was kind of creeped out. But that was the very last time anyone heard from Kathleen.
While the search is going on of the Wilseyville property, police also search Charles Ng's San Francisco apartment. And they searched that about 5 days after he walked away from the lumber store. In his apartment, they found more video equipment that belonged to the Dubs family, and they found items belonging to Lonnie Bond. They also found items belonging to another missing person, Clifford Parento. Now, Clifford had been a co-worker of Charles Ng's. They both worked at a moving company together in San Francisco. And Clifford's roommate got a call from Charles, who said, hey, is Clifford there? Nope, he's not here. You got to connect with him later. So the roommate knew the two of them were going to get together, Charles and Clifford. The roommate never saw Clifford again. But police discovered Charles Ng later sold Clifford's motorcycle. Also, at Charles Ng's apartment, police found guns and photos of the Wilseyville bunker under construction. So now they know that Charles Ng is aware that Leonard Lake was building this bunker. So the investigation at the Wilseyville property lasted 5 weeks. It involved 4 different law enforcement agencies. On the property, they also found Paul Costner's ID. Now, this was the guy who owned the gold Honda, and he was trying to sell his car and was never seen again, but his sister kept him on the hot sheets. So investigators discovered thousands of bone and tooth fragments buried throughout the property. And forensic anthropologists were able to go, okay, these 4 teeth fragments belong to a child under the age of 3. And we also know that there were at least 4 adults buried, 1 child, and 1 infant. They found a child's liver buried on the property, and hundreds of bone fragments showed various degrees of burning. Kath, in the documentary that we previously mentioned, it said that there were 45 pounds of bone fragments. Ultimately, evidence connecting 12 missing persons were found at the Wilseyville property, including a man named Jeffrey Gerald. He disappeared from San Francisco after telling his roommate that he was going to do a side job. He was going to earn some money helping someone move. This man was never seen again, but his guitar and his Social Security card were found at the Wilseyville property.
So the women who they kidnapped were being used as sex slaves, and the men were being used for their identifications and their money?
That's exactly right. What police realized, and we'll get into this in a minute, was that Leonard Lake was living off the grid, and he needed a constant supply of cash to continue building this bunker and to make his fantasy happen. And he also needed a constant supply of identities. And the victims were just so different. They came from different walks of life. They were unconnected to each other. So it makes sense that missing persons detectives in these various locations never put the pieces of the puzzle together.
Oh, yeah.
There's no reason why they would. But at this point, police know Clara Lynn is not innocent. They knew, because she admitted it to them, that she had driven Charles Ng to the airport after Lake was arrested. And she was saying, but I didn't know anything was wrong. I didn't know what happened. I didn't know he was, on the lam. I didn't know he had tried to shoplift. What some of the detectives thought was that she was actually part of it and sort of waiting in the wings. But others thought, no, Charles walked to her apartment, told her what happened, and she just got him the hell out of there. But she wouldn't cooperate. She and her parents hired an attorney, and she demanded immunity from prosecution. So she was playing the, I have no idea, I'm just the ex-wife, I have no idea kind of thing. And so the district attorney eventually agreed to give her immunity because Leonard Lake is dead and Charles Ng is nowhere to be found. So Kath, one other thing about Clara Lynn. When Leonard Lake took the cyanide tablets and his mom and sisters went to the hospital, they called Clara Lynn and they're like, hey, he took these cyanide tablets. He's unconscious in the hospital. Then Clara Lynn gets a call from Inspector Brune, who introduces herself and says, hey, can we meet tomorrow to talk about things? I'd like to know more about Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. So what we know from this documentary, and they interviewed Leonard Lake's sister, was that the ex-wife was like, ruh-roh. So Clara Lynn calls Lake's sister and says, hey, I just talked to this inspector. I'm concerned about the Wilseyville property. Will you go over there tonight with me so we can remove things that the cops don't need to see? And the sister was like, absolutely not.
Good for her.
But Clara Lynn convinced Lake's mom to go to the property with her.
Nicely done, Mommy.
I know. Thanks, Mommy. So the two women go to the property and they remove boxes and boxes of items. And the mom did not know what was contained within some of the boxes, but she did admit to seeing videotapes. In other words, she knew she was removing videotapes.
So she saw the cassette, she didn't watch the video.
Correct. So then Clara Lynn meets with Inspector Brune the next morning and plays the innocent victim. But when they go to search the Wilseyville property, Clara Lynn didn't expect the detective to recognize the stolen video equipment.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's when
and that's when she's like, I refuse to cooperate now.
Exactly.
Because that'll stop you from finding out anything else.
Right. And so Clara Lynn is given immunity, and they're like, okay, where's Charles Ng? And she's like, I don't know. Yeah, she was not helpful in the least. And they found videos of her, like Leonard Lake would tape their sex sessions, and they found videos of her talking about high school girls and perhaps inviting them to, the home. Or
didn't you say she was a high school aide?
She was a teacher's assistant. That's terrifying. So this woman was a piece of work. It embitters my heart to think about her.
So with Lake dead and Clara Lynn having immunity but not helping in any way, an international manhunt was underway, and Charles Ng became public enemy number one. News media published photos, and airport employees were given his picture so that everyone knew that there was a dangerous fugitive at large. Then just a few weeks later, a 14-year-old boy was playing in a wildlife park in Calgary, Canada, with a friend. He came across an Asian man lying down in a makeshift tent. And just to tell you how far and wide this manhunt had gone, this 14-year-old boy thought he recognized the Asian man as the one from the news. And so he went home and told his parents. Now, a week later, the Asian man, who did turn out to be Charles Ng, was arrested for shoplifting. And the following day, this detective sat down with the young boy and his father at the wildlife park. He asked the boy to show him where the man had been camping, and when the detectives went there, they found evidence that were linked to two of the missing men. So Ng was arrested in Canada, and they actually made him serve time. He actually apparently got into a shootout with a guard.
Yeah, during the shoplifting incident. Like I read in two places that the guard, I want to say, was shot in the hand or injured his hand somehow. So they were serious about prosecuting Lake in Canada.
And having him serve time in prison.
Correct.
So now that he's, though, behind bars, California's like, hi, we want him back because he did way worse to us.
Hi, knock, knock.
Yeah.
Calling for Charles Ng.
Exactly.
And Canada was like, nope.
Because California had the death penalty. And you know how those Canadians are. But California didn't give up the fight, and after Charles Ng fully served the sentence for shoplifting in a Canadian jail in 1991, he was extradited back to the United States. This was 6 years after the bunker from hell was discovered. But Kathy, that's not the worst of it. This guy was a manipulator and a sociopath through and through. He knew how to work the legal system. So he fired lawyer after lawyer after lawyer because remember, each subsequent lawyer had to get up to speed on the information contained in the files. At one point, Ng acted as his own attorney. He filed dozens and dozens of motions. It was like 38 just for firing the attorneys.
Yeah, he filed 38 motions to get rid of his court-appointed lawyer because I believe he acted as his own attorney the entire time. But the judge is like, no, man, you have to have a lawyer.
Because you're not going to get this on appeal.
Exactly. So he would get a court-appointed attorney, and I believe his last attorney estimated there were 2 tons of paper to go through. Like, it was insane. I can't even tell you. Anyway, he would file these motions, 38 motions to get rid of the lawyers. Not all of them were granted, but there was enough of a turnover in attorneys to delay this thing for years.
Eventually, in 1998, trial began. This means that the families had to wait for 13 years before they could see Charles Ng brought to justice.
Just a little background as to how Lake and Ng got connected. Ng was born in Hong Kong to a horrifically abusive father, and he was sent to boarding school in England. He wrote a sexually explicit letter to one of his teachers and was kicked out. So he comes to the United States, and even though he was not a citizen, he was 18 years old and joined the Marines. So he's serving in Hawaii, and there's 2 stories as to how he found Lake. One of them is that while he was serving in the Marines in Hawaii, he met a guy in the Army. He said, I have this buddy Lake. You guys would probably get along. Here's his address, and they became pen pals. The second version of how they met is that Lake posted some type of ad in a survivalist magazine, and it might have been Soldier of Fortune, but I'm not sure. Ng saw the ad, and he and Lake became pen pals. I actually think that it was the advertisement that brought them together, but I couldn't find that in court records. So they somehow became pen pals. While Ng is posted up in Hawaii, he and a few other Marines decide it would be a really great idea to break into the artillery lockup where all the weapons are kept. So they take a bunch of guns, but they also take like big things. I feel like they took like 2 grenade launchers or something. They bury these items, but eventually they're caught and somebody snitches on all of them. So Ng gets picked up by the military police, but he escapes. He flies to San Francisco and he's like, knock, knock, knock on Leonard Lake's door. And he's like, hi, I'm Charles Ng. I'm going to be busted. Can I stay here?
We're now besties.
Right. Now we're besties. So Lake's like, sure. So the 2 of them, Lake was 12 years older than Ng, and the 2 of them just become these weird, creepy friends. At some point, they are both arrested for some type of weapons violation. Ng goes to, I think, federal prison. I'm not 100% sure, but he goes to prison for a spell. I don't think it was any more than 2 years. Lake, on the other hand, dips, goes to live at the Wilseyville property, and stays off the grid. Once Ng gets out of jail, the 2 of them reconnect. And so Ng and Lake live together for a period at the Wilseyville property with Clara Lynn. The 3 had a very sick and twisted relationship.
And I'm sure the perversion from each of them just amplified it exponentially.
Totally. And Lake was said to be verbally abusive to Ng. Ng was very submissive, but Ng bought into this sex slave fantasy of Lake's. And Lake actually served 2 tours in Vietnam, but was discharged for psychological reasons. And I read somewhere he had schizoid personality disorder, but the court records didn't go too deeply into that. But he was one of these people who struggled with relationships, rejection from women. He had 2 divorces, and he was heavily into bondage. And this all escalated in the early 80s when he and Charles Ng were together, and he realized he had a partner in crime.
At trial, there was no direct evidence that Charles Ng killed anyone. He had property of the victims in his possession, and he was clearly seen on the tapes that he and Lake had made, but no murders were recorded. So at trial, of course, Ng blamed everything on Lake. The defense presented evidence of Lake's involvement in several uncharged murders, including Lake's brother Donald, who was killed for his SSDI payments, and his best friend, Charles Gunner. And as we had said, the theory was they kept murdering because they needed the constant supply of fake IDs and money. But at trial, there were 4 cartoons drawn by Charles Ng when he was in a Canadian prison that were entered into evidence, and Kathy, a handwriting expert, was able to confirm that the words that were written as part of the cartoons were actually written by Ng. And these were gross cartoons.
Completely gross.
The first cartoon they entered has Leonard Lake holding a whip in his right hand, standing over a woman who was naked and bound on top of a table in front of Lake. The woman is saying, "Ouch," and Lake is fondling himself with his left hand while saying, "Oh, I love you, Kathleen. I really do." In the cartoon, Charles Ng is standing behind a video camera while eating and saying, "Rice is ready. Dinner time." In the second cartoon, one part of the cartoon had the words Calaveras County remains claiming section. The cartoon featured a man labeled with the coroner's name handing bags of remains to the victims' families. The third cartoon featured 2 men, one labeled Lake and the other labeled Slant, which had been Ng's nickname in prison. The 2 men were shown holding a stretcher with a body on it above a fire, and the body is shown burning in the fire with the words, "Ah, you mofos." But of course, they said the whole word. Lake was shown laughing while Slant leaned against the stretcher, just watching the fire burn. Now, Kath, the fourth cartoon was labeled San Quentin, ... years later. And in that cartoon, Ng was sitting on a bed in a prison cell. The words "no kill, no thrill" and "no gun, no fun" are written on the wall behind him. And Kath, in this cartoon, pictures of the victims were taped on the wall next to Slant. Ultimately, the cartoons, plus the tapes we talked about that were labeled M-Ladies that showed Ng sexually abusing and laughing at Kathleen and Brenda, put the nail in his coffin. A jury convicted Charles Ng of 11 counts of first-degree murder against Deborah Dubbs, Harvey Dubbs, and their baby, Sean Dubbs. Clifford Parenteau, Jeffrey Gerald, Michael Carroll, Kathleen Allen, Lonnie Bond Sr., and their baby, Lonnie Bond Jr., Scott Stapley, and Brenda O'Connor. And Kathy, the only person for whom Ng was not convicted of murder was Paul Costner, whose ID was found on the property when detectives searched it and was listed as the owner of the gold Honda.
And Kath, it was so ironic because it was Paul Costner's car that started all this, and his sister Sharon, who reported him missing every single month to keep the vehicle on the hot sheets. So when she was interviewed, you can just hear the sorrow in her voice. She was saying that she's sitting in the courtroom and there were multiple counts. First degree murder was the most important one, but there were other counts, kidnapping and various things. So she said, I'm sitting there and I'm hearing guilty, guilty, guilty over and over and over, multiple counts for each victim. And they get to Paul and there's no guilty. And so she said it was just devastating. And so she just was expressing I don't get it. 11 people guilty and not for my brother. It was very sad listening.
And imagine if that car hadn't come up as stolen.
I know.
Would they have put an end to it?
It really is ironic.
Yeah.
That her efforts with her brother and no conviction for him.
I do hope, though, that she realizes it was those efforts that brought peace for all of those family members.
Oh, I hope so. And also the reserve officer, John Callis.
Right.
I mean,
not ignoring a vice being taken from a hardware store.
Right.
Of all the things that could have been taken.
Exactly.
He was like, no, I'm not letting him get away with anything.
Right.
Now, understandably, neither side called Clara Lynn to the stand because basically she was a wild card. She could have hurt either of them. She could have hurt both of them, and they didn't want to risk it. So she wasn't held culpable for any of the crimes. And essentially, she got away with whatever perverted things she was involved with in this whole scheme. The penalty phase began in March of 1999. This is now 14 years after the murders. When the jury began its penalty phase deliberations, the bailiff went to the judge and said, OMG, you are not going to believe what happened.
And I'm sure that's a direct quote from the Court of Appeal opinion.
And they put OMG too. Like,
right.
It was weird. I think the bailiff called the judge dude at one point.
Or maybe bruh.
Yeah, that was probably it. It's late 90s. Or yeah, late 90s. It could have happened. And he said, dude, juror number 12 said that she thinks she was contacted by Charles Ng the night before. So the judge, who of course has been working so hard to make sure there is nothing that is going to make him call for a mistrial.
Yeah, he's like, there is no way in the penalty phase we are having a mistrial.
Right.
No way.
And so the bailiff comes to him and tells him this, and he was like, no. So he pulls in.
He's like, Smackdown City.
Exactly. And I'm going to win. So the prosecution and the defense attorney are in the courtroom with the judge and juror number 12. The judge does not allow Charles Ng to step foot in that courtroom for this conversation they're about to have. And they said to juror number 12, okay, what the what? And if you F up my trial, I'm going to find a way to put charges on you. I'm paraphrasing. Or making it all up. One of the two.
Exactly.
Anyway, so the woman comes in and she says, I was at home last night and I got a phone call. The person on the other end was a male with a very soft voice. And he said, is this juror number 12? And she said, who is this? And he said, is this juror number 12? And she was like, tell me who you are. And he again repeated, is this juror number 12? I mean, honestly, this could be a horror film.
Oh, completely.
Yeah. And so she was like, tell me your name. And he said, it's Charles. And she was kind of confused for a second because her brother or her husband, I'm not sure which one it was, had the name Charles. And so she answered him, but was like, yes, I am. And so the man on the other end of the phone said, oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to tell you that I think you're very nice. Now, realizing it might be Charles Ng, juror number 12 said, how did you get my phone number? And he said, I had a friend help me. And then he hung up. So the first thing the juror did, which is so smart, is she called the bailiff. So now we're back to this conference the next morning that juror number 12 is having with the judge and the prosecution and the defense attorney. And the judge said, okay, with all this has happened, do you have the ability to remain objective as a juror?
And one of the things, Kath, that the judge pointed out and that they all kind of agreed on was this could have been a crank call.
Absolutely.
Like they weren't sure if this was actually the Charles Ng.
And honestly, my thought is too, is that it was more likely to be a crank call because why would you expect Charles Ng to be able to get your phone number or even want to call you?
Exactly.
And so juror number 12 said, yes, I absolutely can put this behind me. I will remain objective. And the judge said, cross your heart, hope to die, pinky swear that you will not tell any of the other jurors about the phone call. I believe that's the legal standard.
I think so. And then she responded, stick a needle in my eye. And he's like, okay, I will if you tell anybody.
Thank you for permission. You all have heard this, right? So she agreed not to tell the other jurors about the phone call. But Kathy, they went and searched Charles Ng's cell. And sure enough, he had juror number 12's phone number written on a piece of paper in his cell.
Isn't that terrifying?
Yes, yes, yes. And they were able to verify that a phone call was made to juror number 12 from one of the phones the cellies use.
That is so terrifying. And I actually saw like a brief interview of juror number 12, and she was saying like, it freaked me out in hindsight, you know, like, oh my God.
Yeah, because you can convince yourself it's a crank call.
Right. Like this guy who is accused of murder, torture, and rape has my number. What other information does he have? Right. I mean, terrifying. The jury returned a death sentence on April 30th, 1999. However, Charles Ng was never executed. The 64-year-old, who is labeled a condemned prisoner, is now serving his sentence in the California Medical Facility in Vacaville, California. There were many others who went missing, and Lake and Ng are suspected of killing, burning, and burying as many as 25 people. And in April of 2025, according to SF Gate editor Katie Dowd, investigators re-examined remains that had been long kept in a crypt in San Andreas, but were known to be linked to Lake and Ing because they had been taken from the Wilseyville property. So they decided to pull out the remains and use private labs to do genetic genealogy, and investigators from a cold case task force confirmed that the remains belonged to Brenda O'Connor. And she was one of the ladies on the M tape who was being tortured and begging for her child. In the trial, Ing had been convicted of her murder, and in 2025, her remains were returned to her family. Also identified, now this is 40 years later, so it's just so crazy, were the remains of a previously unknown victim, 28-year-old Reginald Frisbee. Now, he was born in New York in 1956, so he was living in San Francisco at the age of 28 and was last seen in January of 1984. It's not clear how Lake or Ing knew Reggie, which was the name he went by, but his remains were also matched through familial DNA. Now, there's a memorial plaque to the Wilseyville victims that stands in the San Andreas Cemetery, and it reads, "In Wilseyville we found you, our lost ones. Though taken in darkness, you will forever live in light. Rest in peace. Victims of the 1984-85 Wilseyville mass murder."
Thank you for listening, and I forgot to do this last week, but we want to give a shout out to one of our listeners, Monica, who is also a member of our Patreon at the $10 level, which, again, there's a 7-day free trial. But I happened to run into Monica when I was getting my hair done, and she knew the woman who does my hair. And so I was in there while Monica was, in the chair, and I was talking to my hairstylist, and Monica said, "You're Kathy with a K."
Oh my gosh.
I know. And she was super nice. We talked about a lot of stuff. She loves true crime.
How cool is that?
But she said she loves our podcast. She loves the humor. She loves, that we get everything from court records and it's not a ton.
Oh my gosh. I can't believe. So did your hairdresser turn Monica onto us?
Yes. Right when we started a couple of years ago, when I had gone in there to have my hair done, I was telling my hairstylist and she said, "Hey, leave like stickers or cards or whatever on my station, because then if anybody comes through and we talk about it, they can take it and they'll be able to do it."
Oh my God, that's so cool.
And that's what she did and still does. And that's how Monica found out about us.
What's your hairdresser's name?
Her name's Leanne.
Well, thank you, Leanne.
Thank you.
And thank you, Monica.
And Leanne's husband listens.
Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you, Leanne's husband.
I know. Well, thank you for Leanne for telling your husband.
Exactly.